Good evening and welcome to the fifth presentation for the 2023-24 season of Avalanche Canada's webinar series. We're excited to share some great presentations with you again this season. My name is Brent Strand. I'll be your producer for this evening. Lisa Paulson is our moderator and will be looking out for your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you for joining us tonight. For 3 years now, we've presented a variety of webinars and found that being online means we get to share our Avalanche safety messaging with even more of you than before. We're glad that you're with us this evening, and we'd love to see you share these webinars and information with friends this winter. Our mission is to help educate backcountry users to go out, play safe. We want you all to know more, go further, and come home. First off, we'd like to acknowledge that our session is being hosted in the territory of 4 nations, the Sinnix, the Secwepemc, the Ktunaxa, and the Syilx. As a national organization, we also acknowledge the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations whose lands we recreate on. So before we start tonight's show, we'd like to thank all our sponsors. We're very grateful for them being loyal in their support to us. We have government partners, we have our affiliated partners and our program partners, we have premier and sporting sponsors, and we have our contributors that help us out. Tonight's webinar is sponsored by a long-term Mammut sponsor. They've supported public avalanche safety in Canada for over 20 years and supported us since our inception in 2004. Mammut provides us with funding and in-kind products that support our outreach programs and our field teams. Partnerships like this one have the Mammut make public safety programming possible, and we appreciate their ongoing support over the years. So a few housekeeping notes. Everybody's muted when you come on. If you'd like to ask a question, you can hit the raise hand feature, the little button in the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll unmute you. You can ask your question. This is the best way to get a good, concise question and some interaction with our presenters tonight. Otherwise, you can type it in the Q&A box, and we'll keep track of them there, and we'll try and answer them as we go. And there will be some time for Q&A, and we can add that in as well. So in the chat box, we're going to put some posts in there, some links to web pages and other resources that will be talked about during the presentations tonight. So don't forget to stick around as well. So at the end of the sessions, we usually give out a prize. So we got a few prizes tonight. Stick around at the end and we're going to draw some names there. So tonight's presentation, be Avi Savvy, what SAR wants you to know, or search and rescue. Each winter, more people head into the backcountry to escape crowds and find some solace, beauty, and adventure. But it's really important that everyone knows the basics of avalanche safety and preparedness prior to heading out. We want you to avoid needing a rescue. We have great resources, and if you do need a rescue, but like everything else, there are limitations. So tonight's presentation, we'll talk about the essential items that you and everybody should have as different layers of safety, including communication devices and navigation tools, and explore some of their limitations. We also dive into a scenario of what a SAR call looks like and the various challenges that arise. So our first presenter this evening is Lisa Paulson, visitor safety specialist in Banff, Yoho, and Kootenay National Parks, an ACMG mountain guide, professional member of the CAA, and she also teaches AST courses. Lisa has been part of the park safety for over 25 years. Her true roots started being a lifty at Lake Louise on the Paradise Chair. Our second presenter today is AJ Maheu, who started cutting his teeth as an avalanche technician in the Chic-Chocs of Quebec back in 1999. He has been an avalanche professional since 2011, is a member of the Squamish SAR and North Shore Rescue, and the avalanche forecaster and technical safety specialist for Grouse Mountain. He's also a member of the CSGA and works for Alpine Solutions Avalanche Services, Whistler Ski Patrol, and Whistler Heli Skiing. Both of our speakers have extensive experience with backcountry rescues and will share their knowledge, the do's and the don'ts of backcountry travel, so you don't become a rescue statistic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Lisa, and I hope you folks enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, I'm going to just share my screen here. Take me a second here. know it's not totally the one you want to see yet. Let me just stop.
Almost there.
Almost there, yeah. Just hiding behind the Zoom thing's hiding behind. There we go. Now you should have it.
Yeah, but I have your Zoom window on top of it.
Yeah, I'm
just
gonna get rid of
minimize
that.
that one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I won't be able to. You'll have to keep an eye on those questions, Brent.
Yeah,
okay.
No problem.
Yeah,
looks
so
good.
Super psyched to be here. Thanks for having us be able to share some SAR tips with everyone. I've been doing this for a while, and I have to say, like, over the years of the numbers of people I've rescued over the 30 years, I have to say nobody really intends on meeting a member of the search and rescue community. And unlike all of you here tonight, people generally don't want to meet me, at least at work for Parks Canada. So we're going to explore just how you generally don't meet me. I'm going to explore with you some of the reasons why people need to be rescued and what activities they might be doing, and then share with you about 3 tips on how to avoid needing rescue. And then from there, we'll explore, if you really want to meet a search and rescue member, what are some tips on how you can get the fastest and most appropriate response that you need. So first off, I'd like to get a sense of who's in the crowd with us here tonight. There's quite a few of us out there, and I'm kind of curious what kind of user groups we have. So Brent, if you wouldn't mind launching poll number 1, that would be amazing, and we'll get a sense of what user groups are out there. And are we seeing any response there?
Yeah, do you get the poll results there, Lisa?
Yeah, I can't see them, but maybe
I can riddle them off for you. It looks like we have about majority of the folks out there tonight are backcountry skiers or snowboarders at 72%. We got 8% of them are ice climbers. Another small group of couloir skiers or boarders. And then 30% are cross-country skiers. 34% are snowshoers. And then 48% are hiking and walking folks. And then we have 5% that are snowmobilers.
Huh. Well, you know what's so cool about that is that it really lines up with who we are rescuing. I pulled our stats from our rescue database from the last 5 years, and this is how it lines up. Lo and behold, our backcountry skiing boarding crowd take up most of our winter rescues in Banff, Yoho, and Kootenay. Then there's the hiking, walking crowd. And then the skiing out of bounds, out of the ski area, cross-country skiers, ice climbers, here's where you guys sit, couloir skiing. And then down in these smaller slivers, it's things like snowshoeing, tobogganing, ice skating, that kind of thing. So it really lines up with the crowd here tonight. And then we can actually drill down even further and see, like, what is happening to require the rescues. And here's how it shakes out. Most people, it's a simple slip fall on snow or ice that leads to them needing rescue, or they could be lost, missing on the landscape, medical conditions or illnesses, overdue, or then we get into the avalanche involvements. And these are the number of incidents, and the year corresponds to the color. And then if we drill down a little bit further and we look at what some of the contributing hazards might be, we have things. Can you guys see this little bar down here? Brent? The app Zoom US?
Yeah, can you hit the hide button on there?
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Thanks. Okay.
Awesome. Thank
All
you.
right. I was like, that's annoying. So types of contributing hazards, we often, will type in some of what might be contributing to the need for rescue. And what you see boiling out here is difficult travel, fatigue plays a factor. Sometimes it's a judgment thing, just poor position, lack of situational awareness, or judgment, sort of picking a trip that exceeds the ability of the group. Could be an avalanche, could be failure to recognize changing conditions, and then sometimes inadequate equipment. So that's how it shakes out. So from here, this is where I picked the top 3 things you can do to avoid meeting a SAR member. So number 1 is, seems simple, but pick the right trip. So things that you really want to consider here are, the conditions, the avalanche conditions, the weather, the snowpack quality, the day length. This getting to the shortest day of the year, it's not the time to do the bigger trips. Considering the risk tolerances within the group, some people might have a lower risk tolerance and others might have a higher risk tolerance. And then just because you think it's a great idea and can do the trip, it doesn't mean that everybody in the group is up for the trip. So considering all of those things, and then when we go to pick our trip, a lot of people tell me they pick their trips from word of mouth from friends, or they might get some ideas from social media or the guidebooks. Those are all like good sources, but you can sort of truth those ideas by talking directly to, at least in the national parks or Kananaskis, you could speak to information centers that can help you really fine tune that trip idea. And if you're recreating in more like a technical sense, where you might want some clarity on the avalanche forecast or maybe on the ice climb, you can actually speak directly to the forecasting team or a mountain guide. Here's our number here in Banff. Feel free to take a photo of this, but we regularly answer calls from the public, just looking for a little more clarity on conditions. I put in our QR code for our Parks Canada brochures. So you'll find things like the terrain rating brochures for ice climbing and ski touring, plus a bunch of other brochures, great ones for cross-country skiing too. Pick your trip, but then maybe talk to a few other sources to make sure it's the right fit for your group. And then you have a plan A, but you always want to have like the plan B. It's so easy to get a bit later of a start, or the conditions aren't what you think, or you get to the parking lot and it's jammed packed and there's nowhere to park, which seems to be a common thing these days. So you might want to have a backup plan. So that's number 1. Number 2 is think about what you have for navigation. Here's a quick little story. This is Highway 93 North, this red line, and Lake Louise is to the south here. Jasper is way to the north. And a few years ago, we did a rescue for this, a couple of brothers in their early 20s that went to do the Dolomite circuit here. It's a beautiful ski tour around Mount Dolomite. And they were due to come out. It was an easy day trip for them. They were due to come out that night, meet up their dad for a Star Wars movie premiere, but they never showed. And it was too dark for us to do anything that evening. The next morning, we found them. We found tracks descending to the north and going around this mountain, and found them right up here, almost at Pipestone Pass, for those of you familiar with this area. And we talked to them and they're like, oh, we're almost done. And I was like, no, you're so not almost done. You have like another 36 kilometers. And they were so surprised. In reflection with them, they realized that, they didn't have any navigational tools. They didn't have a map, they didn't have compass, they just had a bit of a route description from a guidebook. So I'm curious, in this group, there's so many great tools out there these days for navigation. And I'm wondering what people are using. Like there's All Trails, Gaia, Cal Topo, and then the traditional map and compass sort of thing. So Brent, maybe I could get you to launch poll 3 and we could get a sense of what people are using out there. Let's see. No, I can't.
Still can't see them, Lisa?
Yeah, I think I need a third screen.
Yeah, probably. No problem. I can rip them off.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
we
you can
got
pick
quite
more
a
than
mix
one.
here.
Yeah.
Got Cal Topo for 14%, Fat Map at 26%, Gaia is at 49, All Trails at 44, and other phone mapping apps, we got 21%, regular GPS 33, and then the good old paper maps are coming in at 37% still, which I find
good.
interesting.
Yeah.
So your top ones are Gaia and All Trails.
All right. Well, thanks. My son made me add my mom because that's what he uses. But anyway. So yeah, all great tools. And boy, I think they've really made a difference for people out there. And we're seeing them increasingly used, obviously, because they are such a great tool. But there's been 2 trends that have been emerging with some rescues with them. One is, and you could probably guess this, is people fully rely on them, like they don't have a backup. So then when their phone dies, they don't have a tool to figure out where they are, where they need to go. So that's we've seen some rescues from that. So really recommending, having a battery backup for it. Maybe use some phones in the group, keep them off until you need it, but have a backup. Still carry that paper map as a backup, and consider your compass and maybe an altimeter watch to keep you on track if your phone were to fail. The other common thing that we're starting to see is keep in mind that a lot of the tracks on these apps are crowdsourced. And some of them lead you into like maybe not the wisest terrain choices. And we're seeing that, we have repeat rescues on some routes. So have another system to sort of double check the route that's suggested. Check it like, is it a good route? And secondly, is it good for the conditions, the avalanche and the weather conditions, the snowpack conditions that we have? So just a heads up on those things. Don't put all your eggs in the digital basket. The third point I have is, let's see here, apply the avalanche forecast. So it's one thing to get the avalanche forecast, but it's a whole nother thing to apply it to the terrain. And I'm just going to share with you our call from this last weekend. It was in Little Yoho Valley on Mount Ogden last Saturday. And this was our forecast for Saturday. We were high, considerable, moderate. And over the week, some of you from this area or even regionally, we had that wicked storm where in the Rockies anyways, we got 50 centimeters over top of our very weak and meager snowpack of 30 centimeters. That was facets, depth hoar, surface hoar, spotty crust, all the bad players. And then we had this big load on it. And Saturday, the winds were forecasted to kick up. And we knew that that would transport some snow and further overload this weak layer. And it was in the afternoon that a couple of skiers sort of got up to this ridge line and chose this piece of terrain where the first skier sort of went in, and I'm not exactly sure where they went, but it was the second skier that came in and triggered the slope, and then they were avalanched down 500 meters. Fortunately, most of the mats were below them, and then they were left on the snow surface with, injured leg, back pain, and maybe some internal injuries. And it was really nip and tuck for us. We got the call just as our pilot was putting away the helicopter in Canmore, and we had maybe an hour to fly out. It's about a 45-minute flight alone, so it's amazing. The team got there, dropped a camp kit, and then dropped the rescue team at the lake, which is just below here, Sherbrooke Lake, and they skinned up and cared for the man, got him into safer terrain. But you know, in our conversations with them, we're just like, well, so how did you end up here? You know, this is a piece of complex terrain, and it's high hazard, and high hazards recommended you avoid avalanche terrain, and certainly complex terrain, even in considerable hazard, we would avoid it. And you know, we're aware that there are many guidebooks and social media sites where some aggressive lines are displayed, and certainly there's a time to do them. But usually it's after a period of low hazard. So, you know, we're a bit puzzled, and sometimes, you know, we think, you know, we get asked, you know, as forecasters, do we ever like try and protect people by being conservative with how we describe the avalanche problems and rate the hazard? And I'd really have to tell everybody that no, we really try to be as accurate as we can be. We take all the information from, you know, posts on the Mountain Information Network. We take all the professional information from the ski hills, the guides, from everybody, from our own observations, and really try to nail it for what the conditions are. So we hope people put a lot of trust in the forecast. But we also recognize we're all human, and human factors can really take precedence over our decision making. And I've certainly fallen victim, and some of our teams have fallen victim to it. So really our only defense for that kind of stuff is to really pay attention to how we're making our decisions. And what can help us with that is getting further training. So we have a brilliant set of courses from Avalanche Canada. We have the Avalanche Skills Training 1. We now have a refresher course. There's another one called the Managing Avalanche Terrain course. That's a brilliant one-day course where, you know, you might have your AST1 and you're just looking to get a check on your decision making and managing terrain. You go out with an instructor and you get some really good feedback and tips. The CRS is the Companion Rescue Skills course, and boy, that's also an amazing course to get people taking that repeatedly, just to brush up on their skill sets and making sure they're good and working as a team well, and are up on any new developments. And then of course we have our AST2, which is the 4-day course, and that's really the part 2 of our Avalanche Skills Training course. Together they make a whole. And I'm kind of curious within this crowd, just who has what? I'm wondering if we could launch the poll number 4 and just see where we're sitting. I also added some of the professional level courses so we can get a gauge of if anybody's sitting with that. So Brent, poll number 4, and we can get a sense in the crowd who has what.
They're just picking their polls there, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm just seeing if I can actually display that box, but it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, multiple monitors are your friend sometimes.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. So big group of folks. 78% have their AST1. 10% have taken an AST1 refresher. So AST2, we got 24%, which is a pretty good percentage there. Companion Rescue, 9%. The Managing Avalanche Terrain, 4%. And then other courses, your professional level stuff, we have 16%, which actually is pretty high for most of the webinars we've been hosting.
Oh yeah, well that's amazing. Yeah, and it's so great to get that training. I think it really makes a difference, as I've been involved in this business for 30 years and watched the use in the backcountry explode. But the number of backcountry rescues, avalanche related anyways, hasn't risen, fortunately, to the same extent. So that's good. We're making some good decisions out there. And I'd encourage you to go on to do that AST2. And I'm kind of curious, if you've done your AST1, if there's any barriers or what might be holding you back from the AST2. So if we could launch that poll 5, I'm just kind of curious where folks are at in terms of their progression.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
All right. So 44% said they haven't done enough personal trips yet. So they feel they don't
Okay.
quite have enough experience. And then the next one would be the timing. It hasn't worked for time
Yeah.
off or stuff like that. And then in behind that at 25% for both of them is people say it's too expensive or there's other reasons, which are, that's beyond our control.
Yeah.
And next one is there are no barriers and they're planning to do it this winter for 10% of the folks out there. So that's
Well, that's
great to
awesome.
see. Yeah. And then 4% say they can't find a course. So maybe we need to get them
Okay.
out to us, or we can try and direct them in the right direction there, or maybe they're going to have to
Yeah.
travel a little bit for AST.
Yeah, yeah, and of course there's all those courses listed on the Avalanche Canada site too, which are, you can search up potentially. There's an AST2 there that there might be some space. Yeah, and then Christmas is coming. I'm going to have a few Christmas gift ideas. That's certainly a good way to get some courses, some assistance on courses. And then at any time, people should always remember the Avi Savvy on the Avalanche Canada site. Like, that's a free online course, pretty much. It's awesome. There's lots of interactive exercises, video, and stuff. So I put the QR code there. So that's free, and you can use that anytime to update yourself. And then there's one, this is kind of falls within Apply the Forecast. I feel like I have to mention it given what happened last year, sadly. And that's within our ski areas. A lot of our regions have ski areas within them. And this is Lake Louise. This is a look at West Bowl. And last spring, we had a very unfortunate incident. West Bowl used to be an area that was closed or out of bounds, but now it's within the ski area boundary, and it was closed all winter last winter because they were dealing with a persistent problem at the base of the snowpack. And I have to say, the ski hill snow safety crowd, they are so hardworking at trying to get terrain open for us to ski and enjoy. But they really want to make sure that it's ready to be opened. So unfortunately, this piece of terrain was closed, and we just had a bit of fresh snow, and there's a rope line, closure line that runs along this ridge. Can you guys see my mouse there when I run it down there?
Yeah.
Is that something you can see? Okay. And people started to duck the rope and lay down some tracks in here, and then they went further. And then there's a couple of young, in their 20s, early 20s, and they went in here and triggered the whole slope. And one fellow sadly was critically buried, and the other fellow was buried up to his waist. Nobody had avalanche equipment, and sadly he did not survive. So I just wanted to put a plug in that, the ski areas, they have lots of complex terrain within their tenures, and they do a really good job at trying to get that open for us. But if it is closed, we definitely want to pay attention to those closures. The other beautiful thing that we can access from our ski hills is, some people fondly call it slack country, or it could also be known as there's no slack in slack country. And often we hear about some of these trips that might be word of mouth or through social media, and we get drawn to them, or maybe we see tracks off in the distance. But just a word of caution that you really don't want that kind of information to overweigh or give more bearing on your decisions than, say, the avalanche forecast would. So make sure that you get the avalanche skills training, you get the forecast, you get the gear, and then you combine those to make good decisions if you're going to venture out of the ski area boundary. So that's it for the prevention piece. And then I just have some few tips on if you really need a rescue. Like, none of us are immune. You saw how easily a slip fall can precipitate needing a rescue. I've been rescued. Some of my team have been rescued. So we really need to come up with a plan. And I'm curious, what's your plan? If you needed a rescue, I'm curious what people carry these days for communication tools. So Brent, if you could launch poll 5, I've got a few different devices there, and I'm just kind of curious what people are carrying these days.
That was the comms devices, correct? That would be 6.
Yeah. So cell phone,
Awesome.
Zoleo, InReach, yeah.
You bet.
Yeah.
Let's see what folks have for electronics in their pocket.
Yeah. Extra interference, but a good interference.
Yeah. It's true.
The interference you want.
Yeah.
At the right time.
Okay. That one filled up really fast. Everyone was ready to talk about that rather than training. So here we go. The most popular is cell phone with 77%. And then another good one followed up at 53% is an InReach, which is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then we got the UHF, VHF radios at 21%. And then after that, we have like an iPhone 14, followed by the Zoleo at 9%, and then a Spot at 7%, other SATCOMs at 4%, and then 2% of those folks out there got nada.
Okay. Well, we're going to explore a few of these things, and I'm going to give you a little tour of what happens a bit behind the scenes on some of these things and how efficient it is and how we can work with you, and depending on how you report to us. So here we go. Cell phones. So cell phones work great when we're in cell coverage, obviously. And calling 911 is still a good go-to. It works throughout Canada. And here's the beauty of calling 911 when you're in good cell range, is that dispatch center gets a display of your latitude and longitude and accuracy. We do find if you're on the fringe of good cell coverage, that accuracy may not be so good. Sometimes we get ranges of like, oh, it's 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers. So it's not so ideal, but hopefully we got some other information like the caller on the line that we can tease out where they are. You could also sort of call directly if you're in our region, like the Banff Kootenay area, or if you're in Jasper, Pacific Rim, Glacier, Revelstoke, you can call direct to the emergency dispatch, and those are the numbers. If you want to take a photo of this page, you can also call direct to Kananaskis. And if you do that, you want to be ready to give them your latitude, longitude. And so this might be something you want to play with after the webinar, is enabling the location services on your phone so that you know where to find your latitude, longitude, elevation to be able to give that to a dispatcher. So all these numbers here, they are all landlines. So that's something to keep in mind. They're not numbers that you could text to. So that's something to keep in mind. But once you get transferred to the incident commander for your rescue, we work off cell phones and we might shoot you a text to communicate directly with you. The other device I want to sort of dive into now is our satellite communication devices, because we're getting more and more rescues initiated with these devices. And commonly we get asked, oh, which device should I get? Well, if you're researching them, just make sure you get one that you can two-way communicate with. So paired with your phone or some way that you can text out a message to the responding agency. So that's the main thing. And if you haven't got one of these yet, well, this might be the good Christmas gift. We have one in our family, and let me tell you, it's pretty comforting to know that my budding backpacking daughters have an InReach with them that they can activate rescue if they need to. It's also super helpful on those multi-day trips where I can, give an update on what the weather and what the snowpack, what the avalanche forecast is doing, and then my family can adjust their decisions based on updated information. So it's super helpful for that. If some of you out there have some of the older devices, there was an issue where people were accidentally hitting their SOS. Now they're covered, some of them are covered with a protective covering. But if you have one of the older devices, we'd appreciate you putting it in a Tupperware, maybe in the lid of your pack, so that you don't inadvertently take a break, sit on your pack, and invite some unwanted guests to your lunch in a helicopter, wondering if you need help. So that's something to consider. We're not seeing it as much. It's mostly been engineered out, but something to consider. The other thing I'd just like to take this opportunity to mention is, and we get this a bit, where people call us and say, you know, Johnny's really good at checking in. He checks in. Oh, he's so good. We've heard from him on all his trips, but we haven't heard from him the last 2 check-ins. We're worried. I have to tell you that there's all kinds of reasons why people miss their check-ins. It could be human factor, it could be device factor, but that's typically not viewed as an emergent situation for us. It's usually, you know, we're looking for that pressing of the SOS. Okay, so in my mind, if you haven't got one of these, highly recommend it. In my mind, no first aid kit is complete without them. It's sure helpful to get the rescue going. Now, you might be wondering, you press that SOS button, what happens? Well, rescue, I can tell you rescue doesn't come immediately. This is what happens. So on your iPhone, if you're out there with part of that, I can't remember how many %, but if you're out there with the iPhone, this is how it goes. You press your SOS, it's going to go to an iPhone dispatcher, and then they send it to Northern 911 Dispatch Center, who has a map, and then they send it to Foothills 911 Dispatch, which is the same dispatcher that would receive in this region your 911 call on a cell phone. And then they have to make a decision whether they send it to the ambulance EMS dispatch, or do they think it's a search and rescue call? And then where they think that call is, and whether that's a police RCMP jurisdiction, or whether it could come direct to Banff Jasper Dispatch or Kananaskis Dispatch. And then from there, like, it can circle around in here a bit, depending on what kind of information the Foothills dispatcher has. But eventually it will come to us. And that whole process can take anywhere 30 minutes, 45 minutes I've seen too, especially if it gets caught up in one of the other services. And then once we get a hold of it, we'll obviously have more questions, and we can talk to the iPhone dispatcher, who does a really good job at taking our questions and posing them back to the injured party. So keep an eye on your device for those questions, and certainly confirmation that rescue is coming. The other devices, this is how they go. They've been around a little bit longer, so things are a bit streamlined. I kind of expect these other devices to become a little more streamlined with time as well. But you activate your inReach, it goes to a dispatch center, and some of them are even just streamlined to come directly to us here at the Banff Dispatch or the Kananaskis Jasper, and then right to the rescue leader. So it's a much sort of more streamlined approach. And then as the incident commander, we can speak directly to the injured party. So that's pretty nice. So I can be flying out and communicating to the party I'm going to help, or staying back in the office and communicating. I've actually even spent some nights coaching people out of pieces of terrain around a cliff and down to where they could meet rescue coming by Skidoo. So it's a pretty powerful tool. I've done a lot of rescues over texting, and sometimes not even leaving the office. So one piece of really important information, so you pressed your SOS button. What we'd really like you to do is to follow it up with some pretty key information. And that's these 4 points. If you take anything away, take away these 4 points. This is what we really need. Obviously, your location, And we need your injury, your illness, your mechanism of injury, and the number of people that need help. So if you can shoot us a text right away with that, that'll really help us configure your response. And as we're talking to you, we might have, getting more information where you are. We might have you stay put. It's a lot easier to rescue a target that's not moving. We can find you much easier if you stay put. But sometimes we might want you to move, as was the case. This Bow Hut is on the Wapta ice fields, and this party was skiing out. They were a little bit off route in really bad weather, and ended up triggering this avalanche, and one of the party members broke a leg. And so we knew we couldn't get to them that night. There wasn't enough daylight. There was a storm incoming, and the hazard was high. So we were trying to get them to move out of the overhead hazard here and away, hoping that they'd have some sort of improvised toboggan of some sort. But in the end, when we got there the next morning, they just didn't have the capacity to do that. Fortunately, nothing else came down on them. They stayed on the debris, and we were able to rescue them. The other reason we might have you move is if maybe you could move to a slightly easier place for us to access. So maybe we could land nearby and get you to move closer to a point where we could just easily grab you. There's certainly been some rescues that, people did a beautiful job at setting up a heli landing point for us, and we were able to come in just before it got dark and get the injured party out. So you'll have that kind of communication with us, that rescue's coming, we'll confirm what kind of resources are coming. But, sometimes it's worthwhile to have that backup. Devices don't always work. So it's still a good idea to set up an emergency contact. And so that's somebody not on your trip, that you tell them where you're going, what vehicle you're taking, the make, model, license plate, where it's going to be parked. Tell them a little bit about your trip members, their experience, and your experience with the area, and what your plan B might be, when you expect to be back, and then make sure you check back in with that party when you are back. So we do still get some rescues generated from people overdue, as you remember back in that first slide. And we will generally evaluate the urgency based on the information from the interview we do with that reporting person. And it might be that we just go and simply do a parking lot check. We might put a note on the vehicle, as you see here, just stating, a rescue's been initiated. Please check in when you get out, and sort of go from there. You don't want everything to fail and have no communication, no emergency contact, because we certainly had cases where their first alert that they're overdue is that they've missed work, missed a flight, didn't check out of their hotel, and it's quite a length of time, before those things can get activated that somebody's missing. The next thing you want to do, if you don't have confirmation rescues coming, you might have to consider sending out party members, which is never a nice thing to do, to have to leave your friends that are hurt. But that might be something you have to consider doing if you haven't heard if anybody's coming. So that's it. The rescue's coming. It's always a bit of a decision, basically. In Banff, Kootenay, we are at the ready. We do have a team sitting by. I was sitting by the phone today to support the IC if we need to rescue somebody. And we also have a helicopter that's based in Canmore. But, there could be other rescues going on. The weather could be poor, that we can't actually fly to your location. There might be hazards, avalanche hazards that affect it. Daylight too, we could run out of daylight. You definitely want to save a pocket of time for rescue. As I say, like that, getting through the dispatch services could be half an hour. It could take us about half an hour to get ourselves ready, 45 minutes. And then the flight time is, out towards Lake Louise, it could be half an hour up towards Bro Summit, 45 minutes. So, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, like her little rescue pocket is really nice. An hour before dark is not so great. And then just think about what you have. Are you ready to weather the wait? And have some skills. This Mount Balfour crevasse accident a few years ago, it took 2 days before we were able to get in for the weather to clear. Fortunately, these folks were savvy enough. They were able to build a little snow cave, as did the Mount Rhonda people, where their partner fell through a cornice. They were able to have an improvised toboggan and slide them down to where they had built a snow cave. We sort of worked on getting there through the night. And then early the next morning, we were able to slide them out to as high as we could get the helicopter. So, definitely it's not necessarily coming immediately, even though we're poised at the ready. There are other factors that could influence that. And as we're poised at the ready, I mean, the whole chain is at the ready in position to respond. So here's an example of, we have EMS on site, we have, fire department members, RCMP, sometimes victim services, STARS Air Ambulance. All these players get activated. And if we don't have much information, we generally just get everything rolling. And as we get more information, we start to stand resources down as we learn more. STARS Air Ambulance, we might just give them a heads up. Hey, we have an avalanche incident, just so they're aware that we're dealing with something that they might be needed. But you should know that that's all happening in the background. And what you might be doing at this point is just waiting. And so I'm kind of curious within this crowd, what do people carry with them to prepare themselves for the wait or to be able to move? So I have, we're almost at the end here. I have poll 2, Brent, that has a list of equipment. And I'm just kind of curious what people might be carrying with them.
Hey, Lisa, while we're waiting for folks to go in on the question there, it seems like they're going a little slow. We got a couple questions here. One is like your national park dispatch numbers. Do they accept texts?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
No text for the national parks.
No text. No. So how that works though, Brent, is once the call gets transferred to the incident commander, I can generate that text.
Okay.
And so then, that's how that works.
So is that similar when someone hits their InReach Mini or their InReach, they hit the SOS, it goes to the main call center, and then in turn, the call center will give you their number in order for you to text directly with those people on their communication devices?
Exactly. So I get their number. Okay. I also get access to their map of their position, which is really amazing, actually. And I've used Google Earth when I've been coaching people, and I'll put in their position at a certain time, and then I'll coach them to do X, Y, Z, turn left, and then I can look on the map and make sure they turned the correct direction or going the right way. Nice. But there's a bit of a lag time. There's a bit of a lag time.
For sure.
So yeah.
And then one more question that's kind of come up. Have you ever heard of the SOS when you hit your InReach or spot, it just gets lost out there and doesn't get addressed?
I haven't heard that, experienced that. We have had one case where people hit the SOS, threw it in the top of their pack. It never really did have that clear view to the sky or the time to acquire the position and send out the message. And then after they did their companion rescue, they pulled it out and they realized that they've been working for like 45 minutes, I think, and it actually didn't send. So that's been that. I know that's happened, but I'm not aware of any cases that kind of gets lost in the ether. They're actually very good at following up. They're like, okay, awesome. We haven't heard from you guys. What are you doing? So,
cool. And then I'm going to ask one more on this whole comms thing. Should I turn my GPS on when I call 911?
Turn your GPS on. Oh, yeah. Well, you definitely want to have your location services enabled. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be a good idea.
Perfect. So now we're going to go back to what do folks carry? So 96% of people, they have a headlamp. And then 93% of the people have a first aid kit. 88% of the people have a phone. And 91% have extra layers or insulation. And then the next one is going to be 72% carry a fire starter. And then 68% have a satellite communication. And then the next one would be improvised toboggan and a repair kit are coming in around 40 to 45% of the folks. 30% of the people have a wood saw. 30% of the people have a leg and arm splint. And 12% is the lowest one for a chemical heat blanket.
Yeah, kind of an unusual item.
It is, but it's so lightweight and skinny, those chemical blankets.
It is. And
kind of shocking.
You know, they are so easy. And we were just talking about the other day, you know, my little jacket's probably not going to fit most of the guys I ski tour with. So, you know, yeah, having an extra like chemical heat blanket. I'll show you some pictures. You know, really your job while you're waiting is to keep your patient warm. And I'm sure there's a few out there, but there's a ready heat blanket that's just a torso, so it's not super heavy, but it's got 6 panels that are that hot shot material that once you activate it, it's kind of like a hot shot. You put it against their base layer and then wrap them up in a foil, make sure they're insulated from the snow surface, maybe wrap them up in some, you know, insulation, and then maybe another tarp. And man, you'd be doing a great favor to that patient. And those ready heats, you're right, they just slide in the back of your pack. You can wrap them with duct tape so you don't risk puncturing them. And a great resource, especially when it's super cold out there and gives you that extra bit of warmth. So, you know, what we want you to do while you're waiting for us is, yeah, keep warm, look after your patient, you know, get your first aid training, make sure you have the splints to be able to look after them. And consider carrying some pain medication and simply the stuff over the counter like Tylenol, ibuprofen, and take them as prescribed on the bottle. Taking them together, they work synergistically and they can provide some really good pain control. So consider that. And then preserve the battery of your devices. So keep your phone warm. Don't, you know, waste the battery with selfies and whatnot. Is really, really helpful. And update us with any status change. Here's, you know, an incident we did last winter where we went out the door to this avalanche accident in the red on Emerald Slide Path. And the first message was avalanche, partial varial, broken lower leg. And we're like, oh, okay. You know, we got a lot of the other resources going, but we're kind of thinking that in our head until these 2 dots, which were 2 different parties, but one was a medic and the other was an off-duty wilderness firefighter, both well-trained, and they got up there and gave us the information, no, difficulty breathing, shocky, and that got us going on a whole nother chain of care and allowed the medics that were responding to get ready with doctor's orders and things, and the whole chain worked really well to help save this guy and get him to Calgary Hospital. So think of that, updating status change while you wait. And then while you're waiting for our arrival, here's what we want you to know. When we're coming in via helicopter, we want you to be visible. Nobody these days seems to be wearing nice bright colors, but we often wish they were. But nice bright colors, a bright tarp, but what works really well is we will come up to check you out on the heli. We might not even see you for a while, is just to hold up your phone and put on your flashlight, wave around like you're at a concert. That is super helpful. Give us the rescue Y, hold up the phone, super helpful. If you are in an area where you can make a bit of a flat helipad, think 3 bus lengths by 3 bus lengths. That's a great pad. You can tromp it out to give it some definition. Maybe stick in some spruce boughs, make sure they're well stuck into the snow to give it some definition, because it's hard landing in the snow. Secure loose objects, light backpacks, ball caps. We don't want anything being kicked up by the spindrift from the rotor blades and getting into the helicopter rotors. And of course, last thing is don't approach. Like, no matter how familiar you are with working with helicopters, we prefer you to stay in a tight bundle and protect your patient, and then just wait for instruction or a rescuer to come towards you. If we're coming by ground, we want you again to be visible, be heard, call out, whistle. We might ask you to meet up with responders at the trailhead and guide us in or flag us a route in. So that's in a nutshell what we want you to do to prepare for our arrival. So I'm pretty much done, except I have a little quiz. So if you have a piece of paper, you can see how much you remember from this whirlwind tour. So avoiding rescue, I'm just going to give you a few seconds. What are some 3 things that you think you could do to avoid needing rescue? And just to review those are: pick the right trip, think about what you have for navigation, have some backups, and work to apply the avalanche forecast, continue your training so you can do a good job of that. Activating rescue, always think of that backup emergency contact, communication device, have one with you, a phone or satellite communication device. Great Christmas gifts. Think about the information we need. Just 4 things can really help us out a lot to make sure that we get the right resources coming to you. As you wait for us, think about, staying put or moving to safety, keeping warm, caring for the patient, update status change. And as we arrive, be visible, use the lights, helicopter, secure your loose items, build a helipad, don't approach us. And by ground, flag or guide us in, we might ask you to do that. So that's about it. So thank you so much. I mean, I know I speak for our whole team that we want you to have a really enjoyable time while you come out into the mountains in the winter. We'll do our very best to give you the most current, up-to-date information, and you're always welcome to phone us for clarity to get on the avalanche forecast or any trip information. And you can do your part by seeking out that information and getting the extra training. There's lots of great resources on Avalanche Canada. If you want to contribute to what they're doing, you can do that on the foundation page. There's a couple of Facebook pages. I think they're going to put these links in the chat, but there's a Parks Mountain Safety Facebook, Kananaskis. Venture Smart has some really great trip planning tools. So check out all that stuff, and we want you to have a great winter. And if there's any other questions, Brent, I'd love to answer.
Looks like you've covered it mostly. Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Nothing really outlined there. We're going to get AJ in the queue here. Thank you so much, Lisa. That's great.
Super fun. Yeah, we're a phone call away if you have any questions, so feel free.
Let's get you to stop sharing your screen there, Lisa.
Yeah, just going over to that screen. And my computer doesn't like Zoom.
Yeah, I just stopped it for you there, no problem.
Wicked, thank you.
AJ.
Okay, so let me just get my screen up. And okay, can you see that?
You bet, looks good.
Perfect. And it even works. Thanks, Lisa. That was awesome. So what I want to do now is to take a slightly different tack on a lot of the things that Lisa has talked about already. Of course, I'm not going to reinvent the whole thing, but I also want to maybe bring, it might be a bit of a sobering look at what it means to actually call for search and rescue outside of a national park. I think that we're very fortunate to have Parks Canada and their team. They're very professional and well-trained team. And then when you're outside of a national park in BC, then you fall under volunteer search and rescue, and it's an entirely different world. And my two inspirations for this presentation is, the first one is from Bruce Tremper from Staying Alive in Avalanche Terrain. And it's that quote, thou shalt be obsessed with consequences. And it's a difficult message to get across. You know, I have two teenage boys, and they keep rolling their eyes. They hate the fact that I'm part of search and rescue, because every time they say, "Oh, can I hit that jump?" And I said, "Well, son, let me tell you about the guy who wanted to hit a jump just like that one and died." So there's a lot of that going on in our house, and the picture on the side kind of represents a little bit how I feel when I go out in the Spearhead range. So I'm the climber on the left there, climbing up and looking at all the kids sort of zooming around, seemingly completely unprepared, and just thinking like, holy crap, like these people have no idea how much trouble they're in if something goes sideways. And, of course, maybe I'm a little bit overreacting. Maybe they're a little bit more prepared than they appear. But that's definitely often how I feel. But then again, it's hard to give a lecture like this without sounding sort of patronizing, or the last thing that I want is to sound like I'm telling you you have no business being in the backcountry unless you're some kind of wilderness ninja or something. We're all somewhere on the learning curve. No matter how long you've been playing in the mountains for, you still have stuff to learn. And then that's sort of the inspiration, or my second inspiration is that quote, is that, you do your best until you know better. And then when you know better, then you do better. And hopefully this presentation is going to help us achieve that. So the concept of vulnerability, I find, is often underestimated or misunderstood. So it's basically a very simple concept. It's your inability to withstand the effect of a hostile environment. And so if you look at the picture in the background, that I would qualify that as a hostile environment. As beautiful as it is, it's not really a place where you can hang out indefinitely. There's no food, it's pretty cold. The weather is going to affect it. But I would say the person in the picture is not especially vulnerable at the moment, because he has a number of layer of safety, or a defensive measure. He's properly clothed. He has skis on his feet that allows him to move around. He's fit. He has a backpack with a bunch of gear in it. So he's doing okay. A window of vulnerability is when one of these measures actually is either diminished, compromised, or lacking altogether. And the thing with the window of vulnerability is that it's not always obvious. It's not evident that it's there until that measure is needed. For example, if you don't have a helmet, as long as nothing hits your head, it's fine, and you don't really realize that you don't have a helmet, or that your layers are diminished. And that's an important concept, because as we go through a day in the backcountry, those layers that we have, they tend to either stay the same or get diminished in some way. So I think Lisa touched on a lot of these things, and that's just essentially the same information presented a little bit differently. And these, to me, is all of our layers of defenses. And I want this presentation to be a little bit more introspective, maybe about you and your partners in the backcountry, and your habits, and really ask yourself, how robust are these layers, right? So we carry clothing, we carry food, we carry water, and I saw all of that in the polls that were brought up earlier. And then there's shelter part as well. I think Lisa drove that point home that you're going to have to wait. And you typically get really cold while you wait. And so having a little shelter, but those emergency shelters are pretty marginal, and having some experience with them and practice with them, practice spending maybe a night out without all the sleeping bag and everything, is a very powerful way of understanding your vulnerability. The next one is a means of travel, right? So your ski equipment, make sure it's in good order, make sure it's appropriate for your trip. But it's not just your equipment, it can be all your fitness as well. Lisa was mentioning picking the right trip, and fitness level is a huge thing for that. Same thing for means of navigation. It was really quite interesting to see that quite a number of people are still carrying a map and compass. And I think that, while, I resisted the phone for a while, I have to say that's mostly what I use nowadays to navigate. That said, I also always have a map and compass. I feel fairly competent with those things because I used them for so long. And now I'm forcing my kids to use them as well. So they roll their eyes on that too. But so I force them when we go out skiing to navigate with a map and compass. Means of communication, we talked about that quite a bit. So understanding the limitations of those things, especially when you start to press an SOS button on your inReach, and then it bounces to a call center in Texas and then comes back to the RCMP. And so there's a lot of back and forth. And I think Lisa did a really good job of explaining how, the limitation. It's a great, great, powerful tool, and you should absolutely have one, but you have to understand the limitations of it. The rescue equipment as well. So, your transceiver, probe, and shovel. Make sure that this is in good order. Common culprits are those little push pins on the shovel that tend to rust and break or get stuck inside the shaft. The cable of probes, batteries leaking in transceivers, and also other rescue equipment like rescue toboggans. And I'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. Your first aid equipment, making sure that it's adequate. If you're thinking about winter recreation, especially, I think a large portion of the group here was skiers and snowboarders, climbers. So when we're talking about first aid, we're mostly thinking about musculoskeletal injuries, not maybe as much soft tissue injuries. So having equipment that is appropriate for what is foreseeable. And then I'll link that into the knowledge as well. Lisa mentioned Wilderness First Aid, which is a great program. I definitely encourage everybody to take these courses. And often you'll learn to, for example, improvise a leg splint with the gear that you would normally have while you're ski touring. But then you also have to consider that if you use that little foam pad that you're carrying to sit on and put it into a leg splint, then you don't have it to sit on anymore. Now you have to wait, and now you're getting cold. So every time you improvise with some of your equipment, it means that you don't have that equipment for the reason you had it in the first place. And then there's the community. So in this case, you have, your group, your party, the other people who are in the backcountry with you at the same time, and then you have SAR. So, for all of these measures, I think we focused a lot on understanding the limitations of them. And this is a little bit what I want to explore in this presentation is what are the limitations of SAR? And it's not necessarily an easy thing to do here saying, oh, SAR is amazing, but it can fail in this way and that or that way. It's not something that we necessarily want to admit, but I think it's a very important thing to know. So we'll just take it as a little scenario. So this is not necessarily loosely based. It's actually pretty close to SAR call that happened last season. But some things have been changed, like the date, for example. So here's our scenario. It's February 2nd. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. It's -4 degrees. The hazard rating is considerable, moderate. The visibility is variable. There's no precipitation, light winds. You're in a group of 3, and you're out skiing. And because of the hazard, you decided to stick to reasonably tight trees at tree line. So you knew it was considerable, but kind of felt okay with those trees because they felt pretty tight. The weather forecast, there's a system moving in around 6 p.m. We're expecting 15 to 20 centimeters overnight. And the winds from the southeast, 20 to 30 kilometers per hour. Maximum overnight would be 6, and a minimum is expected to be 12. So overall, you know, pretty reasonable day out. So here's the accident. While you're skiing in those steep, fairly tight trees, one of your friends just triggers a pocket. It's just a small size one, but it's pretty steep trees, and he goes for a bit of a ride, hitting some trees at pretty high speed on the way down. At the bottom, your friend is not buried, but has a broken leg and is in a great deal of pain. So take a second to sort of visualize yourself into that scenario. And then let's talk about what's going to happen. So you call SAR, maybe you had cell phone service, or maybe you have an inReach. However you managed to call SAR, you managed to get in touch with them. But you have to expect probably hours before anyone shows up. Probably more so if you're calling volunteer search and rescue rather than search and rescue from the national parks. Because we don't, while we have a lot of resource, we have a lot of people who can respond, we're not at the ready, and we don't necessarily have a helicopter available to us all the time. But there are a lot of things to do right now, and you have to understand that they're your responsibilities. So STAR can assist you for sure, but there are things that we can't really help you with, and these are the things that need to happen immediately, right? So in this case, you have to realize the window of vulnerability that just opened, because essentially all of your layers of defense are compromised in some way, right? So you were using safe travel practices, but now you can't really expose one person at a time. You have to bundle up because you have to go help your friend with the broken leg, right? Your first aid skills and equipment are going to be put to the test. You're going to have to wait there for quite some time. So you're going to put to the test your shelter, your all your extra clothes that you have. Your means of travels are compromised because that person can't move around much anymore. Hopefully you have a little emergency toboggan maybe to get into a safer location. Your means of communication are going to be tested. So if you did call for help with an inReach, you know, going back and forth with the inReach is not necessarily an easy thing to do. And your navigation skills are going to be put to the test as well. So when you call in, well, if you have an inReach or if you have a cell phone with good batteries, we might be able to get a location from you. But if you need to figure out exactly where you are and give coordinates, that's a skill that you have to be able to apply. So that's a big window of vulnerability. There's a lot of things playing against you at that point, right? You need to split the leg so you can move your friend. So that's on you. You need to get to a safer location away from the avalanche hazard. That's on you. And that's, you know, like in Lisa's presentation, when they ask people, well, it'd be great if you could move to a better spot because you know, if you made a terrain choice that we don't necessarily agree with, we're not going to put volunteers at risk in order to get to that location. And staying warm is actually pretty hard. It's especially hard for the person with the broken leg because they're on the ground and they can't really move around all that much. So just as a recap of everything we said, let's imagine that you did a lot of those things right? So with the hazard that's considerable, you felt pretty good in the tight trees, but you still used good travel practice. skiing one at a time, meaning that only one person got hurt. But we just saw that now this is compromised because now you have to expose multiple people to the same location. You had means to navigate and communicate, so you're able to call for help and send your coordinates. You're trained in wilderness first aid for this accident, which is foreseeable. I mean, if you're backcountry skiing for any length of time, at one point somebody's going to break a leg. Well, hopefully not, but it's not a weird act of God. It's a foreseeable accident, and you have to be prepared for that. And then your group had an emergency toboggan. I know that Lisa had Alpine Threadworks, which makes a really good product. On the bottom right here, you have another website for a company out of the Chic-Chocs, where I started as an avalanche technician, and they also have a really, really good product out there, which I encourage you to go check out. And then, you know, you have your emergency shelters and you're prepared to wait and you have some extra food. And so you essentially did everything right. So now what happens? Well, you called for help, and in our world, it's mostly going to be if no matter which whether you use a Spot or an InReach or an iPhone, it eventually will be sent to 911 dispatch and the RCMP. The RCMP at this point is going to try to gather more information. And as soon as they realize that it's way up in the mountain, we have trained professional agencies to respond to emergencies. Basically, fire departments, ambulance service, and the police department. But when they realize that this is way out in the mountain and in avalanche terrain, they do essentially what any sane trained professional would do. They call in the volunteers. And now, before you accuse me of making fun of volunteers, I have to remind you that I'm part of not one, but two of these teams. And I chose that picture because that's often how I feel when I have to respond. There's a lot of things that need to happen very quickly, and now we're calling for a bunch of people to drop everything what they're doing and get together and come up with a plan. And that's a pretty big task. So here's how it works. All search and rescue teams in BC have to follow our provincial avalanche safety plan. So the public PSLV, Public Safety Lifeline Volunteer Avalanche Safety Plan. And so the search manager who takes this call from the RCMP, the first thing they have to do is to appoint an avalanche safety officer. So for this, according to our avalanche safety plan, we need two things. We need a terrain rating and we need an avalanche forecast. And these things are not necessarily readily available in all regions, especially the avalanche terrain exposure scale rating. So once we have an avalanche hazard rating and a location with an AITS rating, then we use this matrix on the right, and it basically dictates the level of training that is required to be an avalanche safety officer. And as you can see, most of everything requires advanced training, which is defined in the ASP as a CA operations level 2, except for simple terrain up to moderate hazard or challenging terrain and low hazard. Everything else, your avalanche safety officer needs to be a level 2, but it just so happens that there's a lot of teams that don't have an ops level 2 within their ranks. So if that's the case, then we're either moving to mutual aid and asking for another team from an area nearby to assist with the response, or we're going to ask for the Ministry of Transportation or other agencies to provide an avalanche safety officer. And of course, that takes time. Now, the avalanche safety officer is going to, the first job is to create an avalanche operations plan. And that also takes actually a fair bit of time. Because we're not at the ready all the time, like Lisa's team, we have to, okay, sit down and say, okay, what are we dealing with? What kind of snowpack do we have? Where is this person? So it's, typically it will take me about, say, at least an hour to do an avalanche operations plan diligently. And I'm not going to go through all the steps of that, but all that time that clock is ticking and that person with the broken leg is getting colder and colder, but we just can't really do it much quicker than that. So once we have an avalanche safety officer who wrote an avalanche safety plan, operations plan, I should say, then we call in the team. And we don't necessarily know who's available to respond. So remember that these are all volunteers. They all have jobs and they all have families. So we put in the call and then we see what we get, who can respond. And then the job of the avalanche safety officer and the search manager is to elect a team lead. So a person who's actually going to lead the team in the field. And that person also needs to have a certain level of training. And some teams are absolutely stacked. Places like Whistler or Golden or Revelstoke, they have tons of avalanche professionals in their ranks. But there are other teams who are really struggling and may not actually have the people or the people with the skills necessary to fill in that role. And because it's, again, a volunteer organization, we never really 100% know what we're going to get and who's going to be available to answer the call. So once this is done, we sit together with the team who's going to respond, and then we're going to look at a number of things. We're going to look at the level of urgency, like how quickly do we need to get there? We're going to look at what resources we have available, like what is the skills level and training level of the people who are available for the call? Do we have a helicopter or not? Do we have other agencies that can help us out? How much daylight do we have left? What's the weather like right now? And what's the weather going to be like in a few hours while the task is happening? What kind of terrain are we getting ourselves into? The team skills level, how are we going to set up our communication, and do we need mutual aid? So all of this needs to be done basically from the seat of our pants as quickly as possible. And very often, especially at this time of year, in a sort of time compressed fashion because we're running out of daylight, which is a very common situation. Once we have our plan, then we're going to essentially put it through this tool to assess the risk and whether or not the risk is acceptable. Now, this is very, very similar to the evaluator. Know that a lot of you have the AST1. So it's very similar to the evaluator, but it has to do with you have your operations risk score and your response capability score. And if you score too high, if you're in the orange, then you have to go back to the drawing board and say, how can we change our plan so that we bring it back to the green? And then the operation is finally launched. So we execute the plan as we agreed, and we're trying to constantly reevaluate the risk. One of the big issues that we have is a lot of teams don't have a lot of snowpack data. Sure, we have the Avalanche Canada Bulletin, which is a great resource, but if we're responding in active weather with hazard that is fluctuating, it's a little bit of a too blunt a tool for us to use, and so we have to reassess as we go. And then the other big issue is, there's a common saying in the avalanche world where it said, well, when the snowpack is the question, then the terrain is your answer. Well, in SAR, that unfortunately doesn't really works that way. So when the snowpack is the question, the terrain is wherever your subject happens to be. And And so that can be a big problem, especially if we're responding to an area where we don't really know a whole lot about the snowpack. A good example of that is for me in Squamish, we have the Tantalus Range, which is fairly big mountains, and not overly crowded, certainly, but there's quite a bit of traffic. There's a hut up there and there's quite a bit of people going, but we get very little information because there's very little commercial operations going up there. There's no weather station. So we don't get regular snowpack data. So when we go in there, it's always a little bit blind. So we can't just charge into complex terrain without taking some time to try to evaluate what we're getting ourselves into. So a few things to take away. So SAR is coming, maybe. So there's a lot of places where they will struggle to find an avalanche safety officer. They will struggle to find a rescue team lead. They may require additional resource, either from Ministry of Transportation or mutual aid, and that will take time. There's no question about that. I started off with that quote from Bruce Tremper that you have to be obsessed with consequences. So asking yourself what could happen is only the first question. The real questions to illustrate your vulnerability is, okay, if that thing happens, how would it actually play out? Like, what does it mean? Am I actually prepared to deal with it? And knowing what we know now about SAR and the delays and everything that they need to do before they get to us, are we ready for this? Are we ready to really wait? Are you even ready to spend the night, which is, quite possible. And then we want to always strive to improve. So, what I suggest, and I do this myself, is at the start of every season, I have this list here, and I try to improve a small thing on each and every one of these topics. So I'll try to improve on my navigational skills. Maybe, you're new to Gaia, or, CalTopo has a fantastic tutorial on how to use every single one of the functions on there. So maybe that's your goal for the seasons. Go through the CalTopo tutorial and really learn this thing inside and out. Or maybe you're not very good with a map and compass, and you decide this year I'm going to still have my phone as a backup, but I'm really going to try to focus and increase my my sort of analog navigation. Your rescue skills. Like, nobody can ever be too good at using a transceiver. So, challenge yourself, do multiple burials, do deep burials, do close proximity burials. If you really want to take this to the next level, then pair it with your first aid skills. Go out with your group, create a scenario, where you have to rescue somebody and then imagine injuries and then improvise treatments, let's say for a broken leg, and move that person out of avalanche terrain, and then bundle up to simulate that you're going to have to wait for 3 hours. And then, do a good debrief after that, asking yourself, okay, so what worked, what didn't work, what did we really wish that we had in order to get through this? The group management skills is a tough one, and the only way to get good at managing your group and managing the terrain, certainly the managing avalanche terrain course is a good place to start, but then it requires quite a bit of practice. None of that is incredibly complex, but it's still hard to do. And often what we do is, when we go out, we don't necessarily push the limit and expose ourselves to high levels of hazard. So we don't feel like we need to be super tight on our terrain management skills. But we should always, ski like it's high hazard kind of thing, and really know where people are and manage your group very well. And then your equipment and systems. So we all have our little systems, like the stuff that we carry in the backcountry. And that changes constantly. And every year I have like a new piece of gear that I'm excited about. I say, oh yeah, this is gonna be great and can replace some other stuff. So you kind of have to be a little bit obsessed with this stuff and have a system that really works for you very well. And I know this is a terrible slide as far as PowerPoint presentation is are concerned, but my intent here is maybe for you to take a screenshot of it and use this as a pre-trip checklist. So, and this is a checklist that goes beyond like, do I have my skins, right? So ask yourself every time you go out, how much do I know about the avalanche hazard? If all you have is a color, you need to know a lot more than that. Like click onto those tabs, go into the forecast details and the problems and know exactly what you were expecting to find so that when you're out there, you can try to validate it, right? Do you have a trip plan that includes decision points and alternatives? Lisa mentioned, the importance of having a plan B. Did I leave this trip plan with somebody reliable so that if something happens, somebody is going to realize that I'm missing and probably activate some kind of response? Is my travel equipment, skills, and fitness level appropriate for a trip? Are my navigational skills robust and equipment redundant? So I'm not just relying on my phone, but I also have a paper map and a compass in my backpack. What about my rescue skills? When's the last time I practiced? Am I confident that if something happens, I can actually respond the best that could be expected? And is my gear in good repair? Even if you never use your probe, just having your probe in your backpack getting shaked around tends to chafe the cables and stuff like that. So people who don't practice enough or a lot, your equipment can actually get a little bit of wear and tear just by carrying it around. What about your first aid skills? Is that first aid ticket expired 5 years ago, or are you feeling pretty confident? And maybe now would be a good time to take a wilderness first aid course, or there's a lot of online resources as well that you can actually explore. Then what's the weather going to be, and how is it affecting my vulnerability? And I realize that the visibility that just below is about the same, right? How does the visibility affect my vulnerability? And I separated them because visibility is directly related to weather, but that's something that people don't necessarily appreciate, is the fact that if you get hurt on a day where helicopters can't fly because of visibility, you're quite a bit more vulnerable, and the response time is going to be multiplied. What will the terrain be like, and how does that affect my vulnerability? So if something happens, are we on a tour where we're actually going up a ridge and down, and then we'll have to go back up the ridge in order to get back to the parking lot? If that's the case, then you're definitely a little bit more isolated, and it's not like a straight shot down back to the car. That's another thing that can also be practiced, is get one of those little emergency toboggans and practice hauling people around a little bit. Most of the time when I did that with people, they just could not believe how hard it was. We see those little things, they look super nifty. I said, oh, that's great, I'm going to have one of them. But, once you've tried to bring somebody, especially if you're trying to travel uphill and the snow is deep with one of those toboggans, it's an amazing amount of work. And if you're just on your own, it basically can't be done. Am I equipped with appropriate options to call for help? And then am I equipped to move an injured person over a short distance? And then finally, and this is a big one, am I prepared to spend the night? Because especially in times, like right now during the season where the days are super short, there's a good chance that we might not be able to get to you if something happens to you in the afternoon. By the time we're ready to go, it's probably going to be nighttime. There's a good chance you're going to have to spend the night. So I just want to finish with a few numbers about volunteer SAR in BC. This is from the BC SAR Association. So there's 78 SAR groups in the province, over 3,400 volunteers. And together they put in just over 430,000 hours of volunteering. If we had to pay, if the province had to pay these people, it would cost about $20 million. There's more than 1,500 calls each year. And each year on average, there's about 1,700 people who are either injured or lost that get help by volunteer search and rescue. So if you recreate out in the backcountry, show your volunteer team a little bit of love, and maybe, you know, it's the season for giving. Maybe spring a few bucks towards your SAR team. That's all I got.
Well, that's fantastic, AJ. Great job. Just so much information from you folks. You know, thanks Lisa and AJ for the extremely informative presentation. It reminds us that there's so many layers to consider when we head into the backcountry. Like, we need to consider our own safety and also the safety of those who we might call upon. We also need to know the limitations of any resource we may access, whether it's an item we carry in our pack or someone who responds to a 911 call. It reminds us all that we need to build in that redundancy and those several layers of protection. You know, like maybe 2 different communication devices between the group, maybe an extra bivy sack, or have a bivy sack, you know, or a shelter, or how many fire starting materials do you have? Is it, you know, are they wet? You got extra clothes, and all these added layers of safety are going to help folks stay alive and keep safe out there if things do go sideways. So super appreciative of you folks to help us on this. With that being said, folks, we got, stick around. We got a few prizes there. I just wanted to just briefly talk about Avalanche Canada training programs. These webinars are a great starting point and a helpful addition to your Avalanche safety know-how, but Avalanche education is a lifelong journey, and it doesn't stop here. This is just the beginning. The best way to keep learning and keep your skills honed is to take an Avalanche Canada training course. If you haven't taken any courses yet, which it looks like a lot of you folks had the AST1, the AST1 is the place to start. That's our minimum requirement, you know, of folks out there, a couple-day course. If you've already taken that AST1 and you're spending more time in the backcountry, get that AST2 under your belt. It's going to be the best thing you've done. You know, I've never heard of anybody ever take one of the courses and say, hey, that was a waste of my time. They're all quite eyes open and they're like, wow, I'm never going to look at the mountains the same again. You know, there's also other great options that Lisa talked about. Other than the AST, the Companion Rescue Skills course is a great course to keep your skills up and, you know, practice up that rescue methods. You know, take a look at our Cherry Bowl story online if you're not convinced of that. They did a companion rescue right after they took a course, and thank goodness they did. Another helpful course is Managing Avalanche Terrain to give your travel skills a tune-up. You can take these courses as many times as you like to keep yourself sharp out there. Avalanche Canada Train courses are run by folks who are vetted by us and follow our world-leading curriculum. So be sure to check that your instructor is a licensed Avalanche Canada training provider. We're proud to have a great variety and diversity of licensed providers around the country. So if you're sure to find a course that's right for you out there, you can go online and check out our courses. We're gonna go reach out to Lisa now. She's gonna pull some names. And with that, we got a few prizes here. We got an AvCan hat. And then we're gonna also have a goggle sock there. And we also have a toque to give away. So I hope they showed up. Sometimes they don't work with our backgrounds there. So whenever Lisa's ready, she can pull some names from the
winners. If you hear your name, you can just send an email to producer@avalanche.ca and we'll coordinate with you. The first winner for the prize, I hope I'm getting names right, is Jasmine Way. The second winner that we have for the evening is Oscar Lozada. And the third winner we have is Karen Orr. So Jasmine, Oscar, and Karen, again, that email address is producer@avalanche.ca.
Did you have a question, Jasmine, being a winner? Apparently she just put her hand up by mistake. Happens all the time. Folks, we really appreciate your interest in avalanche safety. You can support essential programs here at Avalanche Canada by donating as little as $10. If you can afford it and would like to help, click the link in the chat box to donate or scan the QR code on your screen. Our next webinar is Wednesday, oh, pardon me, that's incorrect. I believe the next webinar is January 10th. Looks like we got some old information in here. And you can sign up online. Pre-registration is required. Thank you everyone for coming out and showing an interest in avalanche safety tonight. We hope you enjoy your winter in the backcountry, safe from avalanches. Thank you, AJ and Lisa, and Lisa in the moderating in the back end there. Thanks everyone, and have a great night and a safe winter.
Thank you. Have a good night.